The board laughed when Nora Bell said 6 broken machines had never stopped running. For 18 years, she had balanced every wage, wool order, and creditor demand that kept Bellwether Woolen Works alive. Yet when a managing partner called her a widow who merely copied figures, the Duke let him speak in her place. By sunset, the payroll reserve was empty. The wool supplier had stopped delivery, and 300 workers were 5 days from losing everything. Nora had already accepted a better position in Providence. She could leave with her reputation, her ledger, and her future intact. But one line in that ledger proved the mill was not failing by accident. Someone was draining it on purpose, and if Nora returned to expose him, she would never again accept responsibility without power. The board laughed when Nora Bell said 6 broken machines had never stopped running. Their amusement rose above the distant clatter of looms from the floor below. Silas Mercer leaned back in the chairman's seat and folded his hands across his waistcoat. Mrs. Bell has mistaken production entries for engineering reports, he said. Nora remained standing beside the long walnut table. She had carried the black ledger upstairs herself, because Mercer had omitted it from the board packet. I have mistaken nothing, she said. The company paid for 3 days of dismantling on machines that produced cloth during every one of those days. One director glanced toward another with an indulgent smile. A second man tapped his pencil against the report Nora had prepared. You are the accounts clerk. Are you not? I am responsible for reconciling production, purchasing, and payroll. Mercer gave a soft laugh. She copies figures from one column into another. The men around the table relaxed, as if he had explained away an unpleasant smell. Nora looked toward Julian Ashcombe at the far end of the room. The Duke of Harrowmere had arrived from England 11 days earlier to examine the failing mill his mother's family had built. He wore a navy frock coat, despite the heat from the factory below. His expression remained controlled, but exhaustion had drawn sharp lines beside his mouth. Nora had expected questions from him. Instead, he turned one page of Mercer's summary. Mr. Mercer will explain the financial position, Julian said. The laughter stopped, but the insult remained. Nora felt it settle around her with the weight of 18 years. She had balanced wages during strikes, floods, and 2 winters when wool prices nearly closed the mill. She had delayed creditors without lying to them. She had found enough cash for coal when the boilers stood one day from silence. Mercer had carried her conclusions into this room and received praise for his discipline. Now the Duke had given him her voice as well. Nora closed the ledger. Then Mr. Mercer may also explain why Friday's wages no longer exist. No one laughed. Mercer's chair scraped against the floor. That is an irresponsible claim. It is a completed reconciliation. Nora placed one hand on the brass clasp of the ledger. The wage reserve should contain $12,400. The youngest director looked down at the printed balance sheet. This report shows $15,000. That report was prepared 4 days ago. Mercer's eyes narrowed. The current balance is being adjusted for wool purchases. No wool invoice has cleared since Monday. Nora spoke without raising her voice. The reserve contained less than $3,000 when the bank closed yesterday. A loom belt snapped somewhere below with a sharp crack. The boardroom windows trembled with the continuing rhythm of the mill. Julian lifted his gaze from the papers. How certain are you? Nora met his eyes. Certain enough that I refuse to initial the final page. Mercer pulled the report toward himself. Her initials appear on every reconciliation sheet, not on the cash release. The Duke looked from Nora to Mercer. "Where is that document?" Mercer answered, before she could. "In the counting room, with the other routine vouchers." Nora released the ledger clasp, but did not open it. "The counting room copy was removed from my desk yesterday afternoon." Mercer's face reddened. "You are accusing senior management of theft before the board." "I am stating that a controlled document is missing. You see the difficulty?" "Your Grace." Mercer turned toward Julian with weary patience. "Mrs. Bell has served the company for many years. But loyalty is not authority." Nora almost smiled at the precision of the insult. Mercer had relied on her loyalty for nearly 2 decades. Now he meant to use her lack of authority as proof that she could not understand what she had maintained. Julian rested both hands on the table. "Mrs. Bell, leave the ledger here." "No." The refusal landed harder than any accusation. One director drew an audible breath. Mercer stared at her, as though a chair had spoken. Julian's expression did not change. "You are refusing an instruction from the controlling shareholder. I am refusing to surrender an original payroll record without a written receipt." Mercer rose. "That ledger belongs to Bellwether Woolen Works. Then Bellwether Woolen Works may acknowledge taking custody of it." Nora drew a blank receipt from the folder beneath her arm. She had written the date, time, title of the ledger, and number of completed pages. Only the receiving signature remained empty. "Mr. Mercer may sign here." Mercer did not reach for the pen. The silence told Nora more than his anger could have done. Julian noticed it too. His eyes moved from the receipt to Mercer's still hands. Before he could speak, the boardroom door opened. Thomas Reed, the assistant cashier, stood on the threshold, with his collar damp from running. He was 22, and usually terrified of entering a directors' meeting. "Nora," he said, forgetting every formal title in the room. "The bank messenger is downstairs." Mercer turned on him. "You were not summoned." Thomas swallowed. "He says the payroll draft cannot be honoured." A murmur passed along the table. Nora had expected the message by noon. It had arrived 23 minutes early. She fastened the ledger and picked up her folder. "How much remains in the operating account?" Thomas looked at Mercer before answering. Nora stepped between his line of sight and the chairman's chair. "Tell the board what the bank gave you." $2,816. The youngest director stood so quickly that his knee struck the table. "That cannot be correct." "It is correct," Nora said. "The finishing room alone earned more than that in wages this week." Mercer rounded the table. "The bank has made an error." "The bank cleared the payments it was authorized to clear." Nora turned to Julian. "Ask which payments were placed ahead of payroll." For the first time that morning, the Duke did not look toward Mercer for an answer. He looked at Nora. Which payments were placed ahead of payroll repair invoices? Mercer stopped moving. Nora heard the change in his breathing. It was slight, but she had spent 18 years listening to men pretend numbers were calm when money had begun to burn. Julian pushed Mercer's summary aside. "How long before wages are due?" 4 days. "And if they are not paid, the day shift will not return on Monday." Nora opened the folder and laid out a production schedule. "The wool supplier will also stop delivery tonight, unless we release part of his balance." One director rubbed his forehead. "Then pay the supplier from the remaining account." "If we do that, the carding room receives no wages at all." "Borrow against next month's orders." "The bank will not extend another $1 while the repair account remains unexplained." Mercer recovered his voice. "This is precisely why clerks should not direct policy." Nora turned toward him. This is not policy. It is arithmetic. Julian studied the production schedule. The page contained rows of machine numbers, shifts, yardage, downtime, and contract destinations. Nora had built the format 12 years earlier because the old reports concealed too much between departments. Which repair invoices emptied the account? He asked. Nora unfastened the black ledger. Mercer moved closer. She placed her palm over the first page before he could touch it. Written receipt, she said. Julian looked at Mercer. Sign it. Mercer gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Your Grace. Indulging this performance will destroy discipline. The payroll is already gone. Julian's tone remained quiet. Sign the receipt. Mercer took the pen. His signature cut across the line with enough pressure to tear the paper. Nora gave him the duplicate and kept the original. Then she opened the ledger to a page marked with a narrow strip of blue cloth. The directors leaned forward. Nora pointed to machine 47. 3 days of dismantling were charged here. Julian followed the row with one finger. Who authorized it, Mr. Mercer? Mercer folded his arms. The machine required a complete bearing replacement. Nora turned the ledger slightly so everyone could see the production column. During those same 3 days, machine 47 produced 912 yards of finished cloth. No one moved. Nora slid the production schedule beside the invoice reference. The cloth was inspected, shipped, and paid for. Julian looked at Mercer. Mercer's face had lost its colour. Nora turned one more page. Machine 51 was also billed as dismantled. She tapped the recorded output beneath it. It completed the largest order of the month while supposedly lying in pieces. Julian kept his finger on the production total. How many machines were billed this way? Nora turned 3 more pages. 6 that I can prove without leaving this room. Mercer looked toward the other directors. She is comparing records created by different departments. That is why the comparison matters. Nora said, a repair invoice means a machine stopped. A production entry means it ran. Both cannot be true at the same hour. The youngest director leaned over the ledger. Could the repair have been performed between shifts? Nora pointed to the time column. The invoices charged full-day labour. The machines ran the day and night shifts. Julian looked at Mercer. Who confirmed the work? The floor supervisors submitted the reports. No, Nora said. The floor supervisors confirmed production. The repair confirmations came from the managing office. Mercer's mouth tightened. You have spent too many years believing columns can explain men. Nora closed the ledger halfway. Columns explain what men prefer not to say. A bell sounded from the yard below. It rang twice. Paused. Then rang once more. Nora turned toward the windows. That is the wool gate. Thomas Reed moved to the glass. A freight wagon stood outside the receiving shed with 2 heavy teams in harness. The driver remained on his seat. No men had begun unloading. Nora gathered the production schedule. Mr. Pritchard has stopped the delivery. Mercer dismissed the concern with one hand. He will unload when the receiving clerk presents the order. He will unload when he receives payment on last week's balance. Julian stood. How do you know that? Because I promised him an answer by 11. The clock on the mantel showed 11 minutes past. Nora placed the written receipt inside her folder. If those bales leave the yard, the carding room stops tomorrow afternoon. Mercer stepped into her path. You are not authorized to negotiate supplier terms. I am authorized to prevent an unnecessary shutdown. You are authorized to keep accounts. Nora looked at Julian. The Duke hesitated for 1 second. It was long enough for her to understand that he still saw authority as something attached to a chair. Then the Woolgate bell rang again. Julian took his coat from the back of his seat. Mrs. Bell will speak with the supplier. Mercer's expression hardened. On whose authority? Mine. Nora did not thank him. She led the way downstairs. The stairwell opened onto the weaving floor, where belts turned overhead and rows of looms struck their steady iron rhythm. Workers glanced up as Nora passed. Several had already heard that the payroll draft had failed. News moved through Bellwether faster than steam. A woman at loom 23 touched 2 fingers to her brow. Nora knew her as May Sullivan, a mother of 4 whose eldest boy had started in the carding room that spring. Friday, May called above the machinery. Nora stopped. I am working on it. Is that a yes? It is not yet. May nodded once. She did not ask for comfort. Nora could not honestly give. Julian watched the exchange. Do they always ask you? They ask the person who answers. Mercer joined them at the foot of the stairs. The board should return to the meeting. Nora continued toward the yard. The meeting has moved. Outside, the July air carried the smell of hot brick, horse sweat, and raw wool. Caleb Pritchard climbed down from the wagon. He was a narrow man with a grey beard and an invoice folded into his coat pocket. Nora, he said. Mr. Pritchard. He glanced at Julian and then at Mercer. I was told the Duke had come to repair matters. Julian answered before Mercer could. That remains my intention. Pritchard drew out the invoice. Intentions do not pay shepherds. Nora took the paper and checked the amount. The balance was exactly what she expected. You can release £3,000 of wool today, she said. Mercer gave a sharp laugh. He can release the full shipment. Pritchard looked at him without warmth. Not without $6,000. Nora handed the invoice back. The mill cannot pay $6,000 today. Mercer stepped closer. You are discussing confidential balances in a yard full of workers. The workers already know the wagons are not moving. Nora pointed toward the upper windows. Every stopped cart is visible from the spinning room. Julian looked at the loaded wagons. How long will £3,000 keep the mill operating? Nora answered at once. 3 days if we prioritise the military cloth and suspend the decorative line. Mercer shook his head. That will breach the New York furnishing contract. No. Nora opened the production schedule. The furnishing order is 11 days ahead. We can pause it for 48 hours without missing delivery. She traced a line with 1 finger. The military cloth carries a completion payment large enough to restore half the wage reserve. Pritchard studied the page. You planned that before coming outside. I planned it last night. Mercer stared at her. You altered production without approval. I prepared an alternative. There is a difference. Julian took the schedule from Nora. Why was this not in the board packet? Nora looked at Mercer. I placed it beneath the cash reconciliation yesterday morning. Mercer's face remained still. The board packet was limited to relevant summaries. Julian read the first page. This appears relevant. The plan sacrifices margin. It preserves payroll. Nora said. Mercer turned toward Pritchard. You will unload the entire shipment. Pritchard folded the invoice and returned it to his pocket. I will take the entire shipment back. The drivers began gathering their reins. Nora stepped beside the first wagon. Caleb, He looked down at her. I can release $2,800 before the bank closes. Mercer moved forward. He will do no such thing. Nora ignored him. In return, you leave £3,000 today and hold the remaining bales for 48 hours. Pritchard shook his head. That does not settle last week. No. It keeps your wagons from returning empty after the next contract payment. He studied her face. What security the military cloth leaves Wednesday evening. The buyer pays on inspection Thursday morning. I will assign the first portion of that payment to your balance. Mercer spoke through his teeth. She cannot assign company receipts. Nora turned to Julian. No, I cannot. The Duke understood the choice placed before him. For the first time, he did not ask Mercer to translate it. What must I sign? Nora removed a blank supplier agreement from her folder. Mercer stared at it. You brought contracts into a board meeting. I brought every document required to keep the mill open. She handed Julian the agreement. It authorizes partial delivery, fixes the remaining balance, and prevents a penalty increase for 48 hours. Julian read each line. You prepared this before knowing the payroll draft would fail. I knew it would fail. The answer quieted the yard more effectively than a shout. Even Pritchard looked toward Mercer. Julian signed. Nora countersigned as the preparing accountant, then gave the agreement to Pritchard. He read it twice. £3,000. He said, receiving shed 2, and the rest held until Thursday noon. Pritchard offered his hand. Nora took it. The drivers climbed down. Within minutes, the first bales rolled toward the receiving doors. Workers watching from the windows began returning to their stations. No one cheered. They had been given 3 days. Not salvation. Julian watched the wool disappear into the shed. You just kept the mill operating without increasing its debt. I moved time, Nora said. That is what working capital often means. Mercer's voice came from behind them. And when Thursday arrives, Nora faced him. By Thursday, we will know whether the mill is failing from poor management or deliberate loss. Mercer smiled without amusement. You intend to make an accusation from 6 entries. I intend to reconcile every repair invoice against machine output. You no longer have access to the counting room. Julian turned. Why would she not? Mercer removed a key from his pocket. Because controlled records cannot remain open while an employee accuses management. Nora looked at the key. He had planned the lockout before the meeting ended. She returned the production schedule to her folder. The invoices are already indexed in my ledger. Mercer's eyes shifted toward the black document case. It was the first time Julian saw fear beneath the man's anger. Nora opened the ledger to the repair register. 6 invoice references appeared in a narrow column. Each one ended with the same approval notation. Julian read the initials aloud. S. M. Nora turned the next page. The same initials appeared again. Then again. Every suspect repair invoice had been approved by Silas Mercer. Julian read the initials again. Silas Mercer did not deny that they were his. A managing partner approves hundreds of payments. Mercer said, My signature proves procedure, not misconduct. Nora closed the ledger before the wind. From the loading doors could lift its pages. It proves access. It does not prove where the money went. No. She secured the brass clasp. That is the next question. Mercer looked toward the receiving shed, where the last wool bales were being unloaded. You have given us 3 days by risking a military contract. I protected the contract that pays first. You made that choice without understanding the company's broader obligations. Nora held his chaser. I wrote the schedule that lists those obligations. Julian stepped between them. Mr. Mercer returned to the boardroom. Mercer did not move. We cannot leave an accused clerk in possession of company records. Julian's eyes hardened. She has not been accused of anything. Mercer glanced at the directors watching from the upper windows. She has accused me in front of the board, the supplier, and half the mill. She identified invoices you approved. That distinction will disappear by supper. Nora understood the warning. By evening, Mercer would tell the town that a frightened widow had endangered the mill to hide her own mistakes. He did not need everyone to believe him. He only needed the bank to doubt her long enough for the deadline to pass. Julian seemed to reach the same conclusion. Mrs. Bell will retain the ledger under the receipt you signed. Mercer's jaw tightened. And the counting room, open it. Your Grace. That would violate every rule of controlled access. Nora answered before Julian could. Then place 2 witnesses at the door and record every document removed. Mercer turned toward her. You do not set the conditions. I am the person you intend to blame if another document disappears. Julian studied Nora for a moment. What do you require to determine where the repair payments went? The original vouchers? The bank endorsements? The vendor register? And the board summaries distributed during the last 9 months? How long? 3 hours to establish the route. Mercer laughed once. You cannot reconstruct 9 months of payments in 3 hours. I already reconstructed 7. The words stopped him. Julian looked at the black case in Nora's hand. When after the first duplicated machine number appeared in April, you knew. In April, I knew something was wrong. Nora kept her voice even. I did not know whether it was careless accounting, false reporting, or theft. Why did you not bring it to the board? I brought 3 written exceptions to Mr. Mercer. Mercer's face remained calm. No formal complaint reached my desk. Nora opened her folder and removed 3 narrow slips. Each bore a date, a voucher number, and a notation requesting supporting documentation. Mercer glanced at them without touching them. These are internal queries. They are the method you required. Julian took the slips. Were they answered? No. Mercer adjusted one cuff. The supporting records were probably delayed. The first request is 12 weeks old. Julian looked at him. Where are the responses I would need to ask the clerks? Nora placed the ledger case against her hip. The clerks cannot answer for approvals issued from the managing office. Mercer's patience broke. You have always resented the limits of your position. No. Nora's reply was immediate. I resent being given responsibility for losses I am forbidden to prevent. The loading crew rolled the final bale through the receiving doors. Caleb Pritchard lifted 2 fingers toward Nora before climbing back onto his wagon. The first crisis had been contained. The larger one had only become visible. Julian turned toward the brick administration building. 3 hours. Mercer stepped in front of him. You are allowing one employee to conduct an investigation into her superior. I am allowing the person who found the discrepancy to explain it. And if she is wrong, Nora answered, then the records will prove me wrong. Mercer looked at Julian. You will regret replacing judgment with suspicion. Julian's expression changed slightly. I did that 11 days ago when I accepted your summaries without asking who prepared them. Mercer went still. It was not an apology to Nora. Not yet. But it was the first time Julian had named his own error. They returned through the weaving floor. The looms struck in measured rows. But the sound was thinner near the decorative line. Foremen were already shifting workers toward the military cloth. Nora saw her alternative schedule moving through the building before the board had formally approved it. The mill trusted what worked. Titles mattered less when a belt stopped turning. At the counting room, Mercer unlocked the door, but kept the key in his hand. Thomas Reed and the youngest director entered as witnesses. Julian followed Nora inside. The room smelled of ink, machine oil, and paper warmed by the afternoon sun. 3 desks stood beneath tall windows. Nora's desk was the smallest. Its drawers were open. The controlled voucher file was missing. She stopped beside the chair. "I left the file here at 6 yesterday evening." Mercer remained in the doorway. Any accounts employee could have moved it. Thomas shook his head. "I locked the room after Mrs. Bell left." Mercer looked at him. "You should consider your answer carefully." Thomas lost colour, but did not look away. "I recorded the time in the key book." Nora crossed to a shelf beside the safe. "The key book, please." Mercer did not move. Julian held out his hand. "The key." For several seconds, only the machinery beyond the wall could be heard. Then Mercer placed it in Julian's palm. Julian unlocked the safe. The key book lay inside beneath the petty cash box. Thomas opened it to the previous evening. His signature appeared at 6:06. A second entry showed the room reopened at 8:40. The authorization line carried Mercer's initials. Julian looked up. "You returned after the staff left." "I often work late." "What did you remove?" "Nothing." Nora examined the entry. The voucher file was present when Thomas locked the room. Mercer stepped inside. "That is an assumption." Thomas spoke quietly. "I placed it on Mrs. Bell's desk myself." Mercer's eyes fixed on him. "You are dismissed." "No," Julian said. Mercer turned. "You cannot manage a factory by protecting insubordination. I am protecting a witness from retaliation." Julian gave the key to Nora. "What else can establish the payment route?" She crossed to the vendor register. "If the vouchers are gone, the bank endorsements will show who received the drafts. And if the bank refuses access, the Duke of Harrowmere owns the controlling shares." For the first time, a trace of dry humour entered her voice. "Your title may finally be useful in an accounting room." Thomas lowered his head to hide a smile. Julian did not appear offended. "What should I ask the bank?" "Do not ask whether Mercer stole the money." Nora opened the vendor register. "Ask for certified endorsements on every draft connected to these 6 invoice numbers." Julian moved closer. "What is the difference?" "The first question invites an opinion. The second produces a record." He nodded. "What would you do after that?" "I would trace the endorsed names against the vendor ownership file. And if the vendor is legitimate, then we examine who authorized work that never occurred." Julian rested one hand on the edge of her desk. He was no longer asking her to defend an accusation. He was asking her to direct the next decision. "What must be paid before Friday to keep the mill outside receivership?" Nora pulled a clean sheet toward her. "Wages first. Then the remaining wool balance. Then coal. Every other creditor must wait. Will they agree? Not because you ask politely." She wrote 3 amounts. "They may agree if you show them that continued production returns more than liquidation." Julian took the page. "And if they refuse, then Bellwether closes before the bank needs to seize it." A messenger appeared at the open door with a yellow envelope. He held it toward Julian. Telegram from Commonwealth Industrial Bank. Your Grace. Julian broke the seal. His eyes moved across the short message once, then returned to the first line. Nora did not ask what it said. She watched the pressure settle into his face. He handed her the telegram. Commonwealth Industrial Bank had rejected any further extension. Unless the missing reserve was restored or the disputed payments were secured, receivers would enter Bellwether Woolen Works at noon on Friday. Nora read the bank's deadline twice before returning the telegram to Julian. Friday noon is not the first deadline, she said. He watched her pull a fresh sheet across the desk. What comes first? The military cloth must reach the inspector by Thursday morning. And after that, the buyer releases enough money to protect half the payroll. Mercer remained near the doorway. You are treating an uncertain payment as if it were cash. Nora dipped her pen into the inkwell. I am treating completed work as the only asset the bank cannot dispute. She listed the departments required to finish the order. Carding had enough wool for 30 hours. Spinning could complete its share before midnight. Weaving needed 2 uninterrupted shifts. Finishing would require every drying rack and 6 additional inspectors. Julian read over her shoulder. What do you need from me? It was the first useful question he had asked since entering Bellwether. Written authority to change the production sequence. Mercer stepped forward. She cannot direct the mill floor. Nora continued writing. Then Mr. Mercer may direct it into receivership. Julian took the pen from her hand. What language? Nora pointed to the empty space beneath the schedule. Temporary operational authority over the military contract until delivery or Friday noon. Mercer struck the desk with 2 fingers. You would place 300 workers under an accounts clerk. No, Nora said. He would place 1 contract under the person who knows what it requires. Julian wrote the authorization in his own hand. He signed it, then turned the paper toward her. Nora read every line before adding her name beneath his pastas. Mercer gave a humorless smile. You wanted authority. I wanted the authority required by the responsibility. She folded the document and handed Thomas the bank request. Take this telegram to Commonwealth Industrial. Thomas read the wording. It requested certified endorsements for the 6 repair drafts and named each invoice reference. Wait for the clerk to copy the numbers. Nora said, Do not leave the originals with anyone. Thomas nodded. Mercer blocked his path. No junior cashier communicates with the bank without the managing office. Julian moved beside the door. He does now. Mercer looked from the Duke to Nora. The balance of the room had shifted, but only by inches. Nora knew men like Mercer could do great damage inside an inch. She carried the production schedule to the weaving floor. Julian followed, while Mercer remained behind with the open safe and the missing vouchers. The change whistle sounded 10 minutes later. Looms on the decorative line slowed to silence. Workers crossed the floor in disciplined groups toward the military frames. Foreman Daniel Price met Nora beside machine 47. This schedule puts the night crew on 4 hours early. It does. They will demand the evening rate. They have earned it. Mercer never approved overtime. Nora showed him Julian's authorization. Price read it and glanced toward the Duke. Julian did not speak. The foreman handed the paper back to Nora. How many yards by midnight? 4,800 inspected yards. That is more than we have finished in 1 shift. It is less than the machines produced last Tuesday, while supposedly dismantled. Price looked toward machine 47. Its shuttle moved cleanly across the frame. Who wrote that repair report? That is what I intend to prove. He studied her face for another moment. Then he called his section leaders together. Nora moved from department to department with the schedule in hand. She did not tell spinners how to spin or mechanics how to maintain belts. She told each foreman what the next room needed, and when it needed it. That was the work no board summary showed. A delay in carding became an idle loom 6 hours later. An idle loom became a missed finishing window. A missed finishing window became a lost buyer. By 3 in the afternoon, every department understood the sequence. By 4, the first completed bolts entered inspection. Julian stood beside the finishing tables as May Sullivan checked the weave beneath a line of bright lamps. "You know every stage," he said. "I know what each stage costs the next one. That is not the same as keeping accounts." "No." Nora marked a rejected bolt for reworking. "It is what keeping useful accounts requires." May lifted another length of dark wool. "No broken threads," she said. Nora entered the yardage. Julian watched her write. "How long has Mercer used your schedules? 11 years. Did the board know you prepared them? The board knew they appeared." "That was not my question." "No." The answer left no place for him to hide. He looked toward the workers carrying the accepted cloth to the packing tables. "I should have asked. You should have known who was responsible before placing blame." Julian accepted the correction. "What do I do now? Make sure the bank receives the endorsements. And here, do not interrupt people who already know their work." A faint smile touched his mouth. Then he stepped away from the tables. At 6, the night crew arrived early. At 7, the packing room completed the first half of the order. At 8, Caleb Pritchard returned to inspect the production progress promised against his wool. Nora showed him the stacked bolts and the signed yardage count. He agreed to hold the remaining wagons until Thursday without adding a penalty. The decision kept Bellwether supplied beyond the bank's deadline. Word moved through the mill before Nora left the packing room. For the first time that day, workers looked at her with something other than fear. They had seen a contract move from paper to finished cloth because she had joined every department around one clear sequence. Julian found her beside the freight doors. "You were right about the supplier. I knew what he required. You were right about the production margin. I wrote it. And you were right about the payroll." Nora fastened her pencil inside the ledger case. "Recognition after proof is useful. Recognition before humiliation would have been better." Julian did not defend himself. Yes. The single word carried more weight than an elaborate apology would have done. A carriage entered the yard beneath the gas lamps. Thomas jumped down before it stopped. He held a sealed bank packet beneath his coat. "The endorsements," he said. The bank manager certified all 6. Nora took the packet, but did not break the seal. "Who accompanied you from the bank? One of their clerks?" A thin man climbed from the carriage and presented his identification to Julian. Nora recorded his name, the time, and the condition of the seal inside her ledger. Only then did she open the packet. 6 certified draft copies lay within. Each had been issued to Mason Industrial Repair Company. Each had been endorsed a second time before deposit. The second endorsements were difficult to read, but the receiving account number was identical. Julian leaned closer. "Does that tell us who owns the account?" "Not yet." Nora placed the drafts in order. "It tells us the money followed one route." The bank clerk cleared his throat. "There is another matter." He removed a folded memorandum. "Mr. Mercer contacted the bank this afternoon." Julian's face hardened. For what purpose? He stated that Mrs. Bell had personally reconciled and approved the repair expenses. Nora looked toward the dark administration windows. Mercer had not tried to explain the payments. He had begun transferring responsibility. The bell above the boardroom entrance rang. A messenger crossed the yard carrying a formal notice. Mercer had called an emergency meeting for 9 that evening. When Nora entered the boardroom, every director was already seated. Silas Mercer stood beside a stack of copied reconciliation pages. He lifted the first page for the room to see. Nora's initials appeared beside every false repair total. Nora examined the initials without reaching for the copied pages. "They resemble mine," she said. Mercer gave the directors a grave look. "They are hers. Then you will not object to showing us the originals?" A muscle moved beside his mouth. "The originals remain with the company records." "The company records you removed from my desk last night." Mercer placed both hands on the stack. "These reconciliations prove Mrs. Bell approved every disputed expense." Nora looked at the first page from where she stood. The columns had been reduced to monthly totals. The machine numbers were gone. The invoice references remained. But the exception marks she had written beside them had disappeared. Julian moved closer to the table. "Did you initial these figures?" "I initialed preliminary totals after entering written objections in the supporting record." Mercer lifted another sheet. "There are no objections here, because this is not the record I initialed." A director frowned. "Are you claiming the pages were altered?" "I am saying, Mr. Mercer has presented copies without the supporting columns." Mercer turned toward Julian. "She changes her accusation whenever a document contradicts her." "Nur unfestliche. I asked for the missing vouchers 12 weeks ago." She laid the 3 unanswered queries beside the copied pages. "I refused to initial the cash release, and now the release has vanished." Mercer said, "How convenient." The attack was clean. He had removed the document, presented partial copies, and turned the absence into evidence against her. Several directors looked uncertain. They did not need to trust Mercer completely. They only needed to believe Nora might share the blame. Julian picked up one reconciliation page. "Why are the machine columns absent? These are board summaries." Mercer said, "Technical details would obscure the financial position. They would also show whether the repairs were possible." Mercer's expression cooled. "Your Grace, a factory cannot survive if every clerk may challenge management by withholding records." Nora rested one hand on the black document case. "I have withheld nothing. You refused to leave the ledger with the board. I required a receipt. You behave as though the company intends to steal its own property. The company did not remove the vouchers. A man with access did." Mercer struck the table with his palm. "That is enough." The directors fell silent. Nora did not step back. Mercer pointed toward the door. "You are suspended pending an examination of these accounts." Julian lowered the copied page. "On whose authority? Mine as managing partner. You are the subject of the examination. I am also responsible for protecting Bellwether from an employee destroying confidence in the bank." Mercer turned toward the directors. "Every hour she carries that ledger through town increases the danger of disclosure." Nora understood what he wanted. He could not explain the machine entries while she held the original ledger. He needed custody before the bank meeting. Julian looked at her. "Can the ledger remain in the company's safe under 2 keys?" "No." Mercer seized the question. You see, Nora faced Julian rather than Mercer. The safe was opened after hours under Mr. Mercer's initials. The voucher file disappeared before morning. Placing the ledger there would not preserve custody. What would my locked case until an independent bank representative receives it? Mercer gave a bitter laugh. She now places herself above the board. No. Nora said. I place an original record beyond the reach of the man whose payments it documents. One director rose. You cannot speak to the managing partner in that manner. Nora looked at him. He spoke of my liability before asking what authority I possessed. I am answering with the same precision. Julian set the copied page down. Mrs. Bell retains the ledger. Messer stared at him. Then I will not accept responsibility for what happens to it. You stopped accepting responsibility when you blamed her initials for payments she could not authorize. The room shifted again. This time, Julian had not merely asked the right question. He had rejected Mercer's framing. Mercer gathered the reconciliation copies into a straight stack. Very well. Mrs. Bell may carry company property wherever she pleases, but she will not enter the counting room, the payroll office, or the production archive until the creditors meet. Nora felt the full purpose of the order. Without access, she could not complete the route from vendor to beneficiary. She could explain the false repairs. She could not yet prove who controlled the receiving account. Julian looked toward the directors. Overrule the suspension. The oldest member shook his head. Our partnership agreement gives daily personnel authority to Mr. Blanks. Mercer. Then amend it, not without formal notice and a recorded vote. Mercer's smile returned. The board may vote after the bank takes possession on Friday. He had built his cover inside the same structure that had kept Nora powerless. Julian controlled the shares. Mercer controlled the daily machinery of delay. Nora collected her unanswered queries. Do not fight over a room I no longer need. Julian turned to her. You said the vendor ownership file was there. It was. And now, Mr. Mercer knows I intended to read it. She closed her folder. If it remains in the room by morning, I will be surprised. Mercer moved toward the door. You are no longer permitted on company grounds. Thomas Reed stood beside the wall. What about the military shipment? Mercer looked at him with open contempt. The foreman can complete a schedule without Mrs. Bell watching them. Nora answered Thomas. Daniel Price has the sequence. The finishing inspector must sign before 7. The freight wagon leaves at 8. Mercer pointed into the corridor. Remove her. No guard moved. The 2 mill watchmen at the door had wives and brothers on the payroll. They looked toward Julian. Then toward Nora. Nora saved them from choosing. She lifted the black case. I am leaving. Julian followed her into the corridor. Behind them, Mercer began instructing the directors to seal the accounting office. Nora descended the stairs without slowing. The weaving floor had grown quieter as the decorative line remained idle. Workers watched from their stations. She kept her shoulders straight until she reached the yard. Only then did Julian speak. I can obtain a court order. Not before the creditors meet. I can remove Mercer by shareholder vote. He has already called the emergency meeting. He controls the notice, the minutes, and the records placed before it. Julian looked back at the administration building. What can you prove without entering that room? That the repair invoices were false. Is that enough to stop payment? Perhaps. To prove Mercer created the failure. No. The answer frustrated him. But he did not command her to invent certainty. What do you need? The ownership behind Mason Industrial Repair. The receiving account would identify it. Then I will ask the bank. The bank will answer the controlling shareholder. Nora adjusted the weight of the document case. But Mercer will say you are protecting the woman who concealed the losses. Julian's face tightened. I do not care what he says about me. You should care what the creditors can prove. The freight doors opened behind them. Workers rolled the completed military cloth toward the packing room. The schedule continued without her. For one brief moment, Nora felt relief. She had designed it to survive her absence. Then May Sullivan approached from the finishing floor. Mrs. Bell. Is it true? He barred you from the wage office? Yes. May glanced at the black case. Will we be paid? Nora could not offer a promise that Mercer now controlled. I have protected what remains. That is not what I asked. No. Nora met her eyes. I cannot guarantee Friday. May absorbed the answer without accusation. My landlord can wait. The grocer will not. She returned to the mill before Nora could reply. Julian watched her go. This is what my silence purchased. Nora looked at him. It helped purchase it. The invoices purchased the rest. He accepted the distinction. A messenger hurried through the gate carrying an envelope marked with Nora's name. It had been forwarded from her boarding house. The return address belonged to Providence Cooperative Wool Company. Nora broke the seal. The position offered more than the earlier telegram had promised. Managing accountant. Joint payment authority. A private apartment near the river. A path to operating partnership after 1 year. She was asked to report on Thursday morning. Julian read nothing over her shoulder. What is it? A future that does not require me to prove I deserve a chair. The words struck him, but he did not reach for the letter. Is the offer sound? Yes. Will you take it? Nora folded the contract along its original crease. A train left Bellwether for Providence at 9 the following morning. She could carry her ledger to an independent bank, preserve her reputation, and begin with authority already written into her employment. Mercer expected her to remain because the mill needed her. Julian might expect the same, though he was learning not to say it. Nora placed the contract beside the ledger inside her case. I will finish the military delivery tonight. After that, Bellwether must bear the cost of the authority it denied me. Julian's voice was quiet. You are leaving? Nora secured the brass clasp. Yes. I am taking the morning train to Providence. At 2 minutes past midnight. The last military bolts were sealed beneath the buyer's inspection tags. Daniel Price signed the yardage count at the freight doors. May Sullivan checked the final length before the cloth was loaded onto the wagon. Nora stood beneath the gas lamps with Julian's temporary authorization folded inside her ledger case. The mill had completed the order. It had not regained its missing money. Inspection begins at 7, Daniel said. The driver must reach the depot before 5. Nora replied, He will. Daniel looked toward the administration building. Mercer's office windows remained bright. Will he stop the shipment? He may try. Nora handed Daniel a duplicate of the Duke's authorization. If anyone delays the wagon, show this to the railway agent and record the name of the person who interferes. Daniel placed the paper inside his coat. You planned for that too. I planned for the man who removed a controlled file after hours. May approached with her work apron folded over one arm. Are you truly leaving in the morning? Nora looked at the dark mill windows. Yes. May's disappointment was quiet. No accusation followed it. You kept us working tonight, she said. That was the agreement I signed. And Friday I cannot promise what another person controls. May nodded. That is more honest than what we hear upstairs. She held out her hand. Nora took it. The finishing workers left in small groups while the freight wagon rolled through the gate. Julian remained beside the loading platform until the rear lamps disappeared toward the depot. You could stay until the bank meeting, he said. Nora looked at him. The old command was absent from his voice. The sentence had been a possibility, not an order. I could, she said, but Bellwether has already taken 18 years of authority from me while leaving every consequence in my hands. I know. No. You have begun to know. Julian accepted the correction. What would make the difference? A position cannot be repaired by a promise made during a crisis. It requires written authority, limits, and a structure that survives the mood of the controlling shareholder. He glanced toward the mill. I do not have that structure ready. Then you do not have an offer. No. The honesty surprised her more than persuasion would have done. Julian removed his gloves. I came here believing Mercer's reports were the mill. I believed accuracy appeared because management required it. I did not ask whose labour made the reports accurate. Nora said nothing. He continued without asking her to ease his discomfort. When he called you a widow who copied figures, I let him summarize your work. I thought I was preserving order. I was preserving the arrangement that made the fraud possible. Nora studied him beneath the gaslight. That is closer. It is not enough. No. I understand. He stepped away from the freight doors. I will not ask you to remain for consequences created by my blindness. I will not use the workers to make your departure feel like betrayal. The words reached the boundary she had expected him to challenge. Instead, he had named it. Nora carried the ledger home through streets emptied by the late hour. Her boarding house room held little that required packing. 2 practical dresses went into one case. Her account books filled the bottom of another. She placed the Providence contract inside her travelling coat, separate from the Bellwether records. The black ledger remained locked beside her bed. She slept for less than 3 hours. At 7:30, Nora entered Bellwether Station in her charcoal walking suit. Morning light spread across the iron roof. Porters moved trunks toward the Providence platform. The ticket in Nora's glove represented more than distance. It gave her joint payment authority from her first day. It gave her a private apartment and a path to partnership. No one at Providence required her to save a business before deciding she deserved a chair. Nora checked the brass clasp on the ledger case. A train whistle sounded beyond the warehouses. Julian entered the station without Mercer. Directors. Or, servant. He carried a sealed envelope and stopped several feet from her. I asked the station master when the Providence train departed. He said, I did not ask him to delay it. Nora looked toward the platform clock. That was wise. The bank answered part of our request. He offered the envelope but did not place it in her hands. Nora read the seal. Commonwealth Industrial Bank had certified it shortly after dawn. What did they confirm? Mason Industrial Repair deposited all 6 drafts into an account held by North River Investment Syndicate. Beneficial owner. The bank will disclose the signature authority to the creditors. Not privately to me. Nora considered the limit. The account connected the false vendor to the syndicate waiting to buy Bellwether. It did not yet place Mercer inside that syndicate. The ledger still proves the repairs were impossible. Julian said, Yes. The bank record proves one destination. Yes. But Mercer will argue that he approved legitimate invoices submitted by someone else. He will. Julian looked at the black case. And only you can explain why the machine entries exclude that defense. Daniel Price understands production. Thomas understands cash releases. Neither understands the entire sequence. Nora heard the appeal beneath the facts. Julian did not turn it into a demand. I brought the bank letter because it belongs with the record. He said, Not because it obliges you to use it. He held it out again. Nora accepted it and recorded the time of transfer on the envelope. "You have improved at custody," she said. "I had a severe teacher." "You had an ignored one." "Yes." The station bell rang once. Porters began closing the baggage cart. Julian looked toward the train. "If you leave, I will present the ledger copies already authenticated by the foreman. You have no ledger copies." His face changed. "Mercer has summaries. Mercer has altered summaries. The original pages have never left my custody." Julian exhaled. "I continue to discover the cost of assuming records reproduce themselves." Nora placed the bank letter inside her case. "You may tell the creditors the original travelled to Providence with its lawful custodian." "Will that protect your reputation?" "It will protect the ledger. My reputation will depend on whether Bellwether tells the truth after I leave." Julian's expression tightened. "I will tell it. That is your responsibility. Not your gift to me." "Yes." A porter called the Providence departure. Nora lifted her travelling case. Julian did not take it from her. He walked beside her only as far as the platform gate. "I am sorry," he said. "Not merely that Mercer insulted you. I am sorry that I accepted the benefit of your judgment while allowing the company to deny you standing. I am sorry that my silence made his accusation easier." Nora held his chaza. "What will you do if I never return? Change the structure. Restore the wage reserve if I must secure it against my shares. Remove Mercer through a recorded vote. Give the next person authority equal to the liability assigned to her." The answer did not ask Nora to reward him. It described work he owed whether she remained or not. "That is accountability," she said. "It is the beginning of it." The locomotive released a cloud of steam along the platform. Nora moved toward the nearest carriage. Thomas Reed came running through the station entrance. His hat was missing, and a torn envelope remained clenched in one hand. "Nora." She stopped beside the carriage step. Thomas reached them with barely enough breath to speak. Mercer moved the creditors' meeting. Julian caught his shoulder before he fell. "To when 10 this morning?" Nora looked at the clock. They had less than 90 minutes. Thomas held out the torn notice. "He says the military payment cannot enter payroll until the board accepts the repair accounts. That gives him control of the money before the bank reviews the endorsements," Nora said. Thomas nodded. He locked the wage office at dawn. He dismissed the payroll clerks and ordered the envelopes returned to the safe. Julian's voice turned cold. "Under whose authority?" "Daily personnel authority. The same clause the board refused to amend last night." Thomas looked at Nora. "Mercer is telling the workers the reserve vanished because you approved the repairs and fled with the original ledger." Across town, a factory bell began ringing out of sequence. One strike followed another without the usual shift pattern. Workers were gathering at the locked wage office. The conductor called for final boarding. Nora could enter the carriage, protect her future, and let Julian face the structure he had allowed. She could also return with the only record capable of preventing earned wages from becoming Mercer's final weapon. Julian stepped away from the carriage door. "The choice is yours," he said. "The Providence offer remains the better offer even if Bellwether falls." The conductor raised his watch. Nora placed one foot on the carriage step as the wage bell continued ringing across town. Nora stepped down from the carriage before the conductor lowered the door. The train pulled away without her. She watched Providence disappear behind steam and iron for exactly one breath. Then she turned toward Thomas. "Who has access to the wage-safe Mercer?" "The head cashier, and the Duke through the controlling share seal." Where is the cashier dismissed before dawn? Nora handed Julian her travelling case. Carry this. Not the ledger. He accepted the distinction without comment. They crossed Bellwether in a hired carriage, while Thomas explained what had happened. Mercer had summoned the creditors, 2 bank representatives, and the board to the mill floor. He had also ordered the workers kept behind the weaving room rail. Nora listened until Thomas finished. Send Daniel Price to the other foreman, she said. Tell them to bring their production books and stand beside the machines they signed for. Thomas nodded. Do we need all the books? No. We need the men who made the entries. She turned to Julian. Ask the bank to state the receiving account only after I establish that the repairs were impossible. Why wait? Because Mercer will call the account a vendor arrangement. First, the room must understand that no legitimate repair existed. Julian looked through the carriage window toward the mill chimney. And the workers, they enter the meeting. The partnership rules exclude them. Their wages are the money being frozen. Nora secured the ledger against her knees. If the creditors expect them to bear the consequence, they may hear the reason. Julian nodded. I will order. The doors opened. No. Ask the bank whether it objects to the wage delegation attending. He understood at once. If the bank agrees, Mercer cannot call it my interference. Correct. The carriage stopped at the mill gate. Workers crowded the yard in aprons, work coats, and shirt sleeves. No machine sounded inside. Bellwether had never seemed larger than when it stood silent. May Sullivan waited beside the locked wage office door. When she saw Nora, anger crossed her face before relief replaced it. You missed your train. I chose not to take it. Because of us. Because those envelopes contain earned wages. Nora looked at the workers gathered behind May. I did not return to resume my old position. May gave a hard nod. Good. Julian went ahead to the assembly floor. Nora entered several minutes later with Thomas and the foreman. The directors sat behind a long table placed between 2 rows of stopped looms. Commonwealth Industrial Bank had sent Mr. Harley, its senior representative, and a clerk carrying the certified endorsement packet. Silas Mercer stood at the centre of the table, as though he had arranged the entire room for his defence. His eyes went first to Nora, then to the black ledger in her hands. You removed company property after suspension, he said. Nora stopped 10 feet from him. I retained an original payroll control record under your signed receipt. Mercer's gaze moved toward the directors. She abandoned her post, and now returns after compromising the evidence. Nora placed the receipt on the table. The ledger remained locked in my custody. The bank letter was transferred to me at Bellwether Station in the presence of the Duke and Thomas Reed. Every transfer has been recorded. Mr. Hale examined the receipt. The bank accepts the custody notation. Mercer turned on him. You cannot authenticate private notes made by the accused employee. No, Nora said. That is why the men who created the production entries are here. Daniel Price and 5 other foremen stepped forward. Behind them, May led 12 workers onto the assembly floor. Mercer pointed toward the rail. They are not permitted in a creditor's proceeding. Mr. Hale adjusted his spectacles. The bank has no objection to a wage delegation hearing why its payroll security is disputed. The directors looked toward Julian. He remained beside the end of the table, rather than taking the central chair. Mrs. Bell has the floor, he said. No one will interrupt her. Nora opened the ledger to the blue marker. She did not look at Mercer. She looked at the directors who had laughed. Bellwether paid to dismantle 6 machines. She turned the ledger so the room could see the first entry. Machine 47 was billed for 3 full days of disassembly, bearing replacement and reassembly. Daniel Price stepped beside her. Nora pointed to his countersignature. "Did you make this production entry?" "I did." "Was machine 47 operating?" "Both shifts." "How much cloth did it produce?" 912 yards. Nora moved to the next line. Machine 51 was billed for the same class of repair. A second foreman confirmed his signature. It ran the day shift and part of the night shift. 1008 yards. Nora said. Mercer raised his voice. Production could have been transferred between frames. Nora turned one page. The contract lot numbers identify the machine. The inspector's mark identifies the finished cloth. The floor signature identifies the foreman. She looked directly at Mercer. A machine could be repaired between shifts. It could not be dismantled for 3 days while producing on all 3. The workers behind May remained silent. The silence no longer belonged to the board. It belonged to people waiting for an answer. Nora presented the remaining 4 entries. Each foreman confirmed his signature. Each machine had produced cloth during the period charged as complete shutdown. Nora placed the 6 invoice references beside the production column. All 6 invoices were approved through the managing office. All 6 were paid to Mason Industrial Repair Company. All 6 payments left the wage reserve before payroll. Mercer faced the creditors. She has proved irregular billing. She has not proved I benefited. Nora nodded. That is true. The admission startled the board. She turned toward Mr. Harley. Please state where Mason Industrial Repair deposited the 6 drafts. Mr. Hale opened the certified packet. North River Investment Syndicate. Nora addressed the directors. Which group filed notice last month of its intention to bid if Bellwether entered receivership? The youngest director answered first. North River. Mercer spread his hands. A repair company may bank with an investor. Nora looked at Mr. Hale again, who held signature authority on the receiving account when these drafts were deposited. The bank representative unfolded the final certification. Silas Mercer and 2 syndicate trustees. A murmur moved through the workers. Mercer's face emptied of expression. Nora closed every path except the one the ledger had already established. You approved payment for work that could not have occurred. The money entered an account you controlled. The same syndicate stood ready to buy this mill after the false payments emptied payroll and forced receivership. Mercer looked toward Julian. This is a conspiracy built from accounting coincidences. Nora placed one finger beneath the production total. No coincidence made cloth on a dismantled machine. He reached for the ledger. Daniel Price stepped between them. Mercer stopped before touching either man or book. Nora did not raise her voice. You called me a widow, who copied figures. She turned toward the directors. You allowed him to reduce 18 years of operational judgment to clerical obedience. Those figures kept wool arriving. Contracts moving, creditors waiting, and wages protected. When you denied me authority, you did not remove responsibility. You merely gave someone else the power to exploit it. Mr. Hale conferred with the second bank representative. Then he rose. Commonwealth Industrial suspends the receivership action pending recovery proceedings against the disputed payments. May closed her eyes for one brief second. Nora continued before relief could take the room from her. The military payment must enter the wage reserve before any director, creditor, or shareholder receives funds. Mr. Hale looked at Julian. Julian answered without taking the floor. I agree. The oldest director lowered his gaze. We all agree. Nora looked at him. You agreed after the mill stopped. He had no reply. The board voted to remove Mercer from daily authority. The 2 mill watchmen escorted him toward the administration doors. He paused beside Nora. This place will fail under a woman who mistakes ledgers for command. Nora held the black book against the table. No, it nearly failed under a man who mistook command for competence. Mercer was taken from the floor. The workers did not cheer. They watched Nora as the wage office keys were placed before her. She did not pick them up. Julian crossed to the table with a formal corporate resolution. He set it beside the ledger and stepped back. This grants authority Bellwether should have recognized years ago. He said, It does not require you to stay. The decision is yours. Nora did not touch the resolution until the wage office doors had been opened. Thomas Reed carried the first locked cash box onto the assembly floor. Mr. Hale placed the military contract payment beside the remaining reserve and confirmed the total before the workers. Only then did Nora sit at the end of the board table. Julian remained standing several feet away. The central chair was empty now. Nora read the resolution from the title to the final signature line. The first page named her operating director of Bellwether Woolen Works. The second granted her authority over payroll, purchasing, production scheduling, and vendor approval. The third gave her a voting partnership interest and an independent seat on the board. She turned to the 4th page. This clause allows the controlling shareholder to revoke operational authority during an emergency. Julian looked toward the company solicitor. Remove it. The solicitor reached for the document. Nora kept one hand on the page. Replacing one sentence is not enough. The board waited. My authority cannot depend upon whether the Duke agrees with a decision after I make it. The oldest director shifted in his chair. No company can operate without limits on an officer. I agree. Nora pointed to the relevant paragraph. The limit should be a recorded board vote for misconduct, incapacity, or breach of duty. It should not be the private displeasure of one shareholder. Julian addressed the solicitor. Write it as she stated. The man began revising the clause. Nora continued reading. The resolution placed the wage reserve under joint control. It required 2 signatures before any money could be moved from payroll. It also granted Nora the right to suspend a vendor when records showed a credible conflict. On the final page, she found a phrase allowing the board to reclaim her partnership interest if she resigned. She looked up. This would turn ownership into another method of keeping me here. One director objected. The interest is compensation for continued service. Then vest it over time. Do not make earned ownership disappear because I exercise my right to leave. Julian did not consult the board. She keeps every share already vested. The solicitor revised the final page. Nora closed the resolution. I have 3 conditions beyond the corporate terms. Julian faced her. State them. My position, salary, and partnership rights will not change if I refuse a personal relationship with you. They will not. You will not direct accounting decisions through private conversation. I will bring company decisions to the board. If either of us ends a courtship, neither will use Bellwether to punish the other. Julian answered without hesitation. Agreed. Nora looked toward the directors. These conditions belong in the minutes. The youngest director opened the record book. They will be entered exactly. Julian stepped toward the workers gathered behind May. Before the vote, I owe Mrs. Bell an account of my own conduct. Nora watched him carefully. An apology delivered after victory could easily become another man's performance. Julian did not take her place beside the ledger. He remained at the edge of the table. I accepted reports built from Mrs. Bell's judgment without asking who created them. I allowed Mr. Mercer's title to outweigh the evidence she placed before me. When he diminished her in this room, I preserved order by preserving his authority. My silence weakened her credibility and strengthened his defense. No one moved. The removal of Mr. Mercer does not settle that failure. The authority written today is not a reward for loyalty. It is recognition of work Bellwether already used and should have valued years ago. He turned toward Nora. If you refuse this resolution, its protections will remain the standard for whoever follows you. The offer no longer depended on her forgiveness. That mattered more than the apology itself. Nora opened the document again. The solicitor placed the revised pages before her. She read each correction aloud. The board voted unanimously to adopt them. Julian surrendered his unilateral removal power through the same recorded vote. Mr. Hale witnessed the transfer of wage reserve control. Thomas entered Nora's name in the signature register beside Julian's. Only after every term took effect did Nora sign. The workers still had not been paid. She rose and carried the new authority to the wage office table. Open the envelopes, she told Thomas. The payroll clerks returned to their places. Each envelope was checked against the time books before it crossed the table. May Sullivan received hers first, as the elected representative of the finishing room. She counted the money and looked at Nora. Every dollar. Earned wages are not favors. Nora said. May held out her hand. This time, the workers behind her began to applaud. The sound moved through the silent mill in a slow, uneven wave. It did not celebrate a rescue. It recognized a change in who had the right to decide. By late afternoon, all 300 workers had been paid. Caleb Pritchard received the first installment promised for the wool. Coal deliveries were secured through the following week. The bank replaced immediate receivership with a supervised recovery agreement. North River Investment Syndicate lost its right to bid on Bellwether assets. Its account was frozen against the disputed drafts. Mercer's partnership interest was seized under the company's fraud provision. The board referred the certified records for prosecution and civil recovery. Nora did not attend when he was taken from the administration building. His consequence required evidence, not her presence. She remained in the wage office and rebuilt the payment sequence for Monday. At 6. Thomas brought her a telegram from Providence. The cooperative had heard that her train arrived without her. Its directors offered to hold the position until the following morning. Nora read the message twice. Julian waited outside the office rather than entering without invitation. She opened the door. Providence will still take me. I expected they would. You are not going to argue that Bellwether needs me more. It does. That does not give it a greater claim on your life. Nora handed him the new corporate resolution. Bellwether no longer asks me to carry responsibility without authority. No. It asks whether the terms are worth choosing. She looked across the mill floor. The machines would start again before dawn. For the first time, her authority would begin with them. I will send Providence my refusal tonight. Julian's relief appeared, but he controlled it. You are staying. As operating director and voting partner. Yes, not as a woman waiting to be selected by a duke. I would not insult you by confusing the two. Nora allowed the silence between them to soften. What did you intend to ask after payroll was paid? Julian glanced toward the wall clock. Whether you would permit me to take you to dinner. Not a board dinner. No. Not a discussion of contracts. No. And not an evening arranged as payment for what happened today. It would be a request from a man who has considerable work left to do. Nora closed the office ledger. Then you may ask. Julian met her eyes. Mrs. Bell, will you have dinner with me tomorrow evening? She considered him long enough to make the freedom of the answer unmistakable. Yes. One dinner. One dinner. He agreed. Nora turned down the gas lamps and locked the wage office door with her own authorized key. She had returned to protect what 300 people had earned. She remained because Bellwether had finally placed real power behind the judgment it could no longer afford to ignore. The Duke walked beside her through the mill gate. But he did not choose her road for her. That choice remained. Nora's. Would you have taken the train? Or returned only after the right to leave was truly yours?